I Want to Dance with Somebody. I Want to Dance with Somebody is a biomusical drama movie about Whitney Houston. Discovered by record executive Clive Davis, Whitney Houston rises from obscurity to international fame in the mid 80s to become one of the greatest singers of her generation. Okay, so this biopic more or less follows the same template as previous biopics before it, like Freddie Mercury, Aretha Franklin, Elton John, and Judy Garland movies in recent years. This I Want to Dance with Somebody biopic is not to be confused with various invasive Whitney Houston documentaries in the past few years. Being a teenager in the 80s and in my 20s in the 90s, I liked Whitney Houston, but I wasn't a massive fan of hers, but couldn't ignore the various mini scandals that made the tabloid newspapers from the late 90s onwards, and I was curious as to how this movie would handle those mini scandals. I was also extremely curious, to say the least, as to how relatively unknown actress Naomi Ackie would play Whitney Houston. Unlike those intrusive Whitney documentaries in the past few years, this biopic is an extremely biased celebration of Whitney Houston's life and music. It most certainly dips its toe in, but it doesn't mush the viewer's face into those scandals. This movie may be guilty of being way too biased towards Whitney Houston, in that if Whitney Houston were still alive, she would unquestionably give this movie her seal of approval. Overall, this Whitney Houston biopic is a relatively accurate account of Whitney Houston's highlights and downfalls, condensed into a 2-hour 20-minute movie. It is hugely entertaining and a must-see at the cinema for any Whitney Houston fan. That said, I did have a few nitpicks with this movie. Like calling this movie I Want to Dance with Somebody. Wouldn't One Moment in Time, The Greatest Love of All, or I Will Always Love You even have made better titles? When Whitney Houston released I Want to Dance with Somebody single in 1987, she had a fresh new image change as featured in the music video, but detailing that era in this movie, Whitney Houston looks exactly as she did in 1985, pre-image change. It kind of beggars belief that the makers of this movie got that detail so wrong. This movie just glazes over The Bodyguard movie, a major landmark in Whitney Houston's career. You would imagine there would be a good few scenes of Whitney on the set of The Bodyguard, but no, not even a Kevin Costner lookalike hovering in the background. And when Whitney Houston did a series of concerts in 2010, I think it was, audiences were bitterly disappointed how Whitney's voice had deteriorated, booing her and walking out of the gigs, demanding a ticket refund. And again, this movie just briefly glazes over that and doesn't go into graphic account of that at all. You know, as I said, it is a very biased and respectful account of Whitney's life, and the way this movie tackles Whitney Houston's tragic death in the hotel bathtub in 2012, again, understandably and respectfully, this movie is extremely tactful on how it deals with that. Again, as I said, pardon the broken record, this biopic is a biased celebration of Whitney Houston's life. Which brings us to Naomi Ackie's performance as Whitney Houston, and I have to admit that one of the main reasons why I wanted to see this movie was to see how relatively unknown actress Naomi Ackie would play Whitney Houston, and I was extremely nervous for her, to be honest. Taking on such an iconic singer, Naomi Ackie needed to get it just right. And got it just right is exactly what Naomi Ackie did as Whitney Houston. Naomi Ackie's performance as Whitney Houston is just flawless. Like, if you thought that Rami Malek's performance as Freddie Mercury in Bohemian Rhapsody was mind-blowing, I promise you, you ain't seen nothing yet. This entire Whitney Houston biopic hinges on Naomi Ackie's performance as Whitney Houston, and Naomi Ackie is just beyond phenomenal. Her performance as Whitney Houston has to be seen to be believed. I mean, Naomi Ackie becomes Whitney Houston, literally, in that you completely forget you're watching an actress performing as Whitney Houston, but it is Whitney Houston that is Whitney Houston in the biopic. I'm not one for counting chickens before they hatch, but Naomi Ackie has the Best Actress Oscar. No buts or maybes about it. This movie is a must-see for Whitney Houston fans, or if, like me, you're curious to see Naomi Ackie's performance as Whitney Houston, then be prepared to be completely blown away. 8 out of 10.